Good evening and welcome to History for Your Sleep. You're safe here and you can let your mind settle for a moment. Take a slow, comfortable breath and allow the day to loosen its weight around you. If these calm journeys bring you peace, you may subscribe whenever it feels right, quietly, naturally, without any hurry at all. Now, a gentle story begins. Tonight, we step along the ancient Silk Road, a world of long desert paths and distant mountain passes, of caravans moving slowly beneath open skies, of lamps glowing in roadside inns, and quiet footsteps crossing stone and sand. A place where mornings rose with dust and light, where evenings cooled beneath woven tents and city walls, and where daily life unfolded in small, steady rhythms across villages, markets, and silent roads. Let us wander there, slowly, softly, and let the Silk Road stretch out before us in the calm of the night. The Silk Road was never a single road. There was no long, unbroken line stretching cleanly from one end of the world to the other. Instead, there were many paths. Some branched apart, others slowly came back together. Some faded into dust, then appeared again farther ahead. Tracks crossed open deserts, climbed into mountains, followed rivers for a time, then turned away without warning. For the people who lived along it, the road was not an idea. It was not a story. It was not a map. It was geography. Each morning began quietly, with practical questions rather than ambition. Where does this path truly lead? Where is the next water? Who controls the land ahead? Distance was not measured in lines or symbols. It was measured in days of walking, in the strength of animals, in how long food and water might last. A caravan could leave confidently at dawn, animals loaded, people prepared, and still fail before reaching the first major stop, simply because one decision, made early, proved wrong. The network changed constantly. Routes shifted with seasons, with wars, with the rise and decline of towns. A well that served travelers one year might be dry the next. A mountain pass safe in summer could become deadly with early snow. The demand required attention, memory, humility. For many people, daily life unfolded not on the road itself, but beside it. Families lived near crossroads, near oases, near narrow passes where travelers had no choice but to pass through. Children grew up watching caravans arrive, then disappear again. They heard unfamiliar languages, saw different clothing, learned early that movement brought opportunity and danger. Some people never traveled far at all. Their entire lives were shaped by who arrived and who did not. The road brought goods. It also brought uncertainty. When caravans arrived regularly, towns thrived. Markets filled, workshops stayed busy, food circulated. But when routes shifted or trade slowed, the change was felt quickly. Fewer travelers meant fewer sales, fewer coins, fewer meals. Dependence on the road was quiet, but absolute. The network made it easy to move things. It also made it easy to disappear. People vanished between known points. A group that failed to arrive might never be found. There were no announcements, no clear endings, only absence. The road remembered footsteps briefly, then erased them with wind, sand, or snow. Travel followed steady rhythms. Caravans rarely rushed. Speed increased risk. Most moved slowly, often 20 to 30 kilometers a day, guided not by ambition but water and terrain. Days repeated themselves, walking, stopping, waiting, adjusting loads, checking animals. Progress came quietly, sometimes barely at all. Waiting was part of the journey. Caravans waited for weather, for guards, for other groups to join. They waited at town gates, at caravanserais, at the edges of deserts. Waiting reduced danger, but it also consumed food, water, and time. A delay could quietly become a threat. The road rewarded patience, but punished mistakes. Choosing the wrong branch could mean missing a well. Misjudging distance could mean arriving too late. These were not dramatic failures. They were ordinary ones, and they happened often. The Silk Road did not promise safety. It offered continuity. Generation after generation learned the same lessons. Trust guides who know the land, respect seasons, count water carefully, watch animals closely. Never assume the road ahead will match the road behind. People did not conquer this landscape. They fitted themselves into it. This is what allowed the network to endure. Not speed, not luxury, but habits refined over centuries. Quiet decisions repeated again and again. And yet, beneath this stability, risk was always present. Borders shifted, authorities changed, taxes appeared without warning. A familiar route one year could become forbidden the next. For ordinary people, the road was never neutral. It shaped when they worked, what they ate, whom they trusted, how far ahead they dared to plan. Life along the Silk Road required practical awareness, an understanding that movement always carried cost. And still, the paths were used, not because they were easy, but because they were necessary. Goods had to move, messages had to travel. Beliefs, skills, and stories followed the same winding routes as grain and cloth. The network survived because people accepted its limits and learned to live within them. Each morning, as the sun rose over the road, it revealed not a grand highway, but a series of choices. Paths opening, paths closing, lives adjusting quietly to what the land allowed. This was the beginning of every journey along the Silk Road, not with adventure, but with careful attention to where the ground itself would permit the next step. Most people along the Silk Road did not travel far. They lived beside the road, close enough to feel its presence, but rooted in one place for most of their lives. Their days were shaped not by movement, but by arrival and departure, by the sound of animals approaching, by dust rising slowly on the horizon, by the long, quiet periods in between. These settlements existed only where travel was possible, near wells, along rivers, at mountain passes, at the edges of deserts where water and shelter could still be found. Geography decided where life could exist. The road followed those same limits, and towns grew only where survival was already barely manageable. For families living there, the road was both livelihood and risk. Caravans brought work, food to sell, animals to water, loads to repair, news to hear, coins to earn. Entire local economies depended on passing movement, on travelers who might never return. Bakers, potters, herders, guides, guards, innkeepers, all relied on footsteps that did not belong to them. But this dependence was fragile. When caravans stopped coming, because of war, because of climate, because routes shifted, life tightened quickly. Goods sat unsold, work disappeared, food became harder to afford. A town that once felt busy could grow quiet within weeks. People did not starve dramatically. They endured slowly. Children grew up learning the rhythms of the road. They learned when caravans usually arrived, which animals meant long-distance trade, which travelers brought danger. They learned to count, to measure, to listen before speaking. Language mattered, but gestures mattered more. In places where many cultures passed through, daily communication relied on repetition, shared phrases, hand signals, familiar habits. People learned to confirm weights twice, to watch expressions closely, to avoid misunderstandings that could become costly. Strangers were normal, trust was not. Most travelers stayed only briefly, one night, sometimes two, long enough to rest, to trade, and to move on. This constant turnover created a careful balance. Towns were used to outsiders, yet never fully comfortable with them. Strangers could bring wealth. They could also bring disease. Illness moved quietly along the road. A cough, a fever, a weakness that appeared days later. People did not understand how sickness traveled, only that it followed movement. When disease arrived, it did not announce itself. It spread through shared water, shared space, shared air. Local families had little choice. Closing the town meant losing trade. Staying open meant exposure. Authority along the road was uneven. Some towns were tightly controlled by officials or garrisons. Others relied on local agreements and informal rules. Taxes could change, tolls could appear, fees could be invented without warning. Travelers complained, locals endured. Both understood that power was unpredictable. For residents, the road meant constant adjustment. One season brought prosperity, the next brought scarcity. People learned to store food when possible, to repair rather than replace, to reuse materials again and again. Waste was rare. Everything had value. Women played visible roles in these communities. They prepared food for travelers, managed small trade, worked in markets and inns. In many settlements, women interacted with the road more often than the men passing through it. This visibility brought opportunity and vulnerability. Protection depended on family, reputation, and circumstance. Night changed the atmosphere. When caravans settled and gates closed, towns grew quieter but more tense. Outsiders slept nearby. Animals shifted and breathed in courtyards. Fires burned low. People listened carefully to unfamiliar sounds. Safety was never assumed. The road brought news, but not always truth. Stories arrived fragmented, delayed, incomplete. Conflicts far away could suddenly matter here. A closed pass, a new ruler, a forbidden route. Ordinary people absorbed these changes without explanation. Life beside the Silk Road required resilience without recognition. There were no monuments to endurance, no records of families who adapted year after year. Yet it was their steady presence that kept the network alive. They maintained wells, repaired walls, fed animals, passed on knowledge of weather, of routes, of survival. The road did not belong to travelers alone. It belonged equally to those who waited, those who watched movement pass while remaining still, those who balanced hospitality with caution, those who lived knowing that tomorrow's prosperity depended on footsteps that might or might not appear. As the sun set each evening, towns beside the road settled into familiar uncertainty. They had done what they could. They had prepared, repaired, waited. Tomorrow, the road might bring opportunity, or it might bring nothing at all. Caravans did not move the way stories suggest. They did not rush forward with excitement or urgency. They moved slowly, carefully, and with constant calculation. Along the Silk Road, movement was not freedom. It was risk, managed one step at a time. Most caravans traveled no more than 20 to 30 kilometers a day. This was not a choice, it was a limit, set by animals, by water, by terrain, and by human endurance. Moving faster increased exhaustion. Slowing down increased danger. Every day existed between these two pressures. The pace was always set by the weakest point: a tired animal, a sick person, a damaged load. One weakness slowed everyone, And when a caravan slowed too much, other problems followed quietly. Water ran low, food disappeared faster than planned, delays accumulated, not dramatically but steadily until they became serious. Waiting was built into caravan life. Caravans waited for guards to arrive. They waited for other groups to join them. They waited for heat to pass. They waited for wind to settle. This waiting did not feel peaceful. It felt uncertain. Each extra day consumed supplies that could not be replaced easily. Yet leaving too soon was often worse than waiting. Movement followed geography, not intention. Routes hugged water sources. Open desert was avoided during the hottest hours. In the mountains, caravans moved in short stages, stopping often to rest animals and people alike. In some regions, traveling at night was safer. In others, it was avoided entirely. Guides were essential. They knew where water could still be found, which paths were passable this season, which valleys had quietly become dangerous. Their knowledge was practical, not written. A wrong decision did not look dramatic at first. It simply led to emptier skins, longer days, and fewer options. Caravans were fragile structures. From a distance, they looked strong. Rows of animals, steady movement, shared purpose. But inside, they depended on cooperation. Disagreements over pace, direction, or resources could fracture a group. Once split, survival became harder for everyone. Sometimes caravans merged for safety. Larger groups reduced the risk of attack and shared the burden of guarding, but they also moved more slowly. More animals meant more water. More people meant more food. Safety came at cost. Not everyone survived the journey. Illness spread quietly. Fatigue accumulated. When someone could no longer continue, choices narrowed quickly. Carrying a person slowed the entire caravan. Stopping delayed everyone. In harsh conditions, decisions were made that no one spoke about openly. The road did not forgive weakness. Animals faced the same reality. They were the true engines of movement. Their condition mattered more than any plan. Daily routines included checking hooves, adjusting loads, watching for illness. A sick animal could halt progress entirely. An injured one might be left behind if stopping threatened the group. This was not cruelty for its own sake. It was survival under constraint. Every decision involved loss. Caravans carried goods, but they also carried anxiety. Traders counted weight again and again. Guards scanned the horizon. Drivers listened for unfamiliar sounds. Even in calm weather, tension stayed close to the surface. Progress was not measured by distance alone. Reaching the next water point intact was success. Arriving without losing an animal was success. Continuing without conflict was success. These small victories defined caravan life far more than profit. Most days looked the same: walking, stopping, adjusting loads, waiting. The repetition was exhausting, but it also created rhythm. People learned to conserve energy, to speak less, to watch more. Silence was practical. Noise wasted strength. Danger was not constant, but it was always possible. A wrong turn, a sudden storm, a delayed arrival. Each risk alone was manageable. Together, they shaped a life of careful movement and restrained hope. Caravans did not represent adventure. They represented endurance. They moved because they had to, because goods needed to travel, because debts waited at the other end, because turning back was often no safer than going forward. At the end of each day, when the caravan finally stopped, relief was temporary. Tomorrow would bring the same calculations, the same questions, the same fragile balance between motion and rest. The road allowed progress, but only slowly, only carefully, only for those who respected its limits. Animals were not support for the journey, they were the journey. Along the Silk Road, nothing moved without them. No goods traveled, no distance closed, no schedule mattered more than the condition of the animals carrying the weight. People followed their limits, not the other way around. Camels, horses, and donkeys determined the shape of every day. Bactrian camels were chosen for cold deserts and harsh climates. Horses were preferred on steppe routes and mountain edges. Donkeys carried lighter loads where terrain allowed. Each animal had a role, and each role came with strict boundaries. The road respected no exceptions. Animals needed constant attention. Loads were checked and redistributed to keep balance. Hooves were examined. Skin was watched carefully for sores caused by friction and weight. Salt was given to maintain strength. Water was offered carefully, never wasted. A healthy animal meant progress. A weak animal meant delay. If one animal slowed, the entire caravan slowed. If it collapsed, decisions had to be made immediately. Unloading took time. Waiting consumed water. Carrying extra weight was rarely possible. In harsh conditions, there were moments when stopping threatened everyone. This was the quiet cruelty of the road. Animals were valuable, but survival was more valuable. When a camel could no longer rise, it was sometimes left behind, not out of indifference, but because the caravan could not afford stillness. Losing one animal was painful. Losing the group was worse. The pace of travel followed animal endurance. Most days were structured around movement and rest, walking, stopping, grazing when possible. Travel avoided the hottest hours in deserts and the most dangerous slopes in mountains. Animals dictated when it was time to stop, long before people admitted exhaustion. Bells hung from necks and harnesses. Their sound helped keep the group together in dust, darkness, and wind. It also reminded everyone that losing an animal meant losing direction. Sound mattered. Silence could mean separation. Animals slept close to people at night, not for comfort, but for protection. Theft was common. A stolen animal could end a journey entirely. Guards watched the perimeter, but everyone listened. A sudden sound in the dark carried meaning. Animal illness was one of the greatest fears. It spread quietly. A limp, a refusal to eat, labored breathing. There were no cures on the road, only observation and hope. An unhealthy animal could force an unplanned stop, near unsafe terrain or without water. Caravans planned routes around animal needs more than human ones. Water points existed because animals required them. Oases mattered because herds could recover there. Caravanserais were built to shelter animals first, people second. Without animals, there was no road. This dependence created pressure. Animals were sometimes overloaded to reduce the number needed. Profit encouraged heavier loads. Heavier loads increased injury. Injury increased risk. The balance was fragile and often misjudged. When animals died, the loss echoed. Goods had to be redistributed. Some were abandoned. Others slowed the group dangerously. Arguments followed the accusations inherent. No one wanted to speak openly about responsibility, but everyone felt it. Animals did not understand the purpose of the journey. They responded only to weight, thirst, heat, and pain. Their endurance was borrowed, not owned. The road demanded payment for every step taken on their backs. People along the Silk Road learned this early. Children growing up near the routes understood that animals mattered more than speed, more than ambition, sometimes more than people. A family might recover from a bad trade. It might not recover from the loss of transport. By the end of each day, animals collapsed where they stood, kneeling, breathing heavily, dust covering their fur. People moved carefully around them, knowing tomorrow depended on how well they rested tonight. The Silk Road did not move because of courage. It moved because animals endured, and when they could not, the road stopped, without apology. On the Silk Road, water mattered more than goods. Silk could be replaced, spices could be lost, metal could be traded later. But without water, nothing continued. Every route, every settlement, every decision, all followed one simple reality. Where water could be found, life could exist. Where it could not, the road ended. Daily planning began with water. How much remained? How far to the next source? How many animals needed to drink? These calculations were repeated constantly, not because people forgot, but because the margin for error was small. A single misjudgment could turn a normal day into a crisis. Wells defined the road. Caravans moved from one water point to the next, often shaping routes that looked indirect but were necessary. Detours were safer than straight lines. Oases became centers of life because they interrupted otherwise empty land. Water was rarely ideal. It could be muddy, salty, stagnant. People drank it anyway. Boiling was not always possible. Filtering was limited. Illness often followed, quietly, without explanation. But refusing water was never an option. Water was rationed carefully. Skins and containers were measured. Sips were counted. Animals drank first, because without them, the caravan could not move. People accepted thirst as part of the journey, knowing it could be endured longer than animal collapse. Conflicts formed around water. At wells and oases, unspoken rules controlled access. Arrival order mattered. Respect mattered. Breaking these rules could lead to arguments or violence. Water sources were places of tension as much as relief. In some regions, access was controlled. Local authorities, guards, powerful families. Payment was demanded, not always officially, sometimes simply enforced by presence. Travelers had little choice but to comply. The value of water made waiting dangerous. Caravans might arrive to find a well crowded or depleted. Waiting meant consuming remaining reserves. Leaving meant risking the unknown. These moments tested judgment and patience. Oases supported entire communities. Local people lived by supplying water, food, animals, and repair services. Their survival depended on travelers, just as travelers depended on them. This balance was fragile. If water levels dropped or routes shifted, both sides suffered. Water shaped daily behavior. Travel avoided the hottest hours. Camps were chosen carefully. Fires were kept small. Fuel conserved. Thirst limited. Movement was adjusted constantly to preserve hydration. Animals revealed water stress first. They slowed, refused to kneel, breathed heavily. These signs forced decisions before humans admitted danger. Ignoring them meant collapse. Sometimes water sources failed. A dried well, a contaminated pool, an oasis reduced to damp ground. In these cases, caravans faced hard limits. Turning back was not always possible. Pushing forward meant gambling with survival. Stories circulated about lost groups, caravans that misjudged distance, travelers who chased false water reflections, camps found abandoned near empty skins. These stories were not legends, they were warnings. Water shaped fear. People feared deserts not because of emptiness, but because of thirst. Mountains were feared not only for cold, but for frozen water sources. Even rivers could be dangerous, blocked access, failed crossings. Night did not remove the problem. Water calculations continued after sunset. Guards counted supplies quietly. Leaders reconsidered plans. Sleep came lightly when reserves were low. The road rewarded discipline. Groups that respected water limits survived. Those who pushed too hard often paid later. Success along the Silk Road depended less on courage than on restraint. This reality stripped the road of illusion. Movement was not heroic, it was careful. Each step was negotiated with the land itself. Water was the silent authority that overruled ambition. People remembered wells more clearly than towns. They remembered where water tasted bitter, where it flowed freely, where it was guarded, where it disappeared. This knowledge was passed down, guarded, respected. In the end, the Silk Road existed only because water allowed it. Every route traced a line between survival points. Every journey followed the logic of thirst, and every day began and ended with the same quiet truth. Without water, the road did not forgive.
Food along the Silk Road was rarely about choice. It was about endurance. Meals were not planned for pleasure or variety. They were calculated to last, to travel well, to require as little preparation as possible. Every item carried had weight, and weight was always a concern. Most food was simple: flatbread made from grains, dried fruit when available, occasional dairy products that could survive movement. Fresh food was rare on the road. Meat was eaten sparingly, often only when an animal died or when a settlement provided it. Cooking during travel was minimal. Fires consumed fuel and time. Both were limited. Hunger was familiar, not the dramatic kind, but the steady presence of never feeling fully satisfied. People learned to function with less. Portions were small. Meals were shared. Food was counted, not enjoyed. Eating followed routine. Food was taken in the morning before movement, and again in the evening after stopping. Midday meals were light, or skipped entirely, especially in hot regions. This reduced thirst and preserved supplies. Sharing food created obligation. Inside caravans, meals were often communal. This strengthened trust, but it also created tension. If supplies ran low, every portion became a decision. Refusing to share could break relationships. Sharing too much could threaten survival. Cities and towns changed this rhythm. Settlements along the road provided cooked food, grain, and supplies. For travelers, these stops were relief. For locals, feeding caravans was business. Prices could rise when demand was high. Travelers had little leverage. Food quality varied. Bread could be coarse. Water could spoil meals. Storage failed. Insects found their way into sacks. Losses were accepted as inevitable. Food illness was common. People did not understand contamination. They connected sickness to bad fortune, rather than cause. A single shared meal could weaken many at once. There was no treatment beyond rest and hope. Hunger affected judgment. Fatigue made people irritable. Small disagreements grew. Leadership decisions became harder. Hunger reduced patience and increased risk-taking, exactly when caution was most needed. Children felt hunger differently. In towns along the road, children often worked to support food supply. They ran errands, helped prepare meals, carried water. Their lives were shaped early by scarcity and responsibility. For poorer traders, food scarcity was constant. Luxury goods passed through their hands, but did not feed them. Profit was delayed, uncertain, often lost. Hunger came first. Payment came later, if at all. Animals competed for food. They required grazing or carried feed. When fodder ran low, decisions had to be made. Feeding animals meant less food for people. Not feeding animals meant no movement. These trade-offs were understood, but never easy. Food theft was a real concern. At night, supplies were guarded. In crowded caravanserai, missing food could cause disputes. Accusations were difficult to prove and easy to make. Seasonal shortages affected everyone.
Drought reduced grain. Cold delayed harvests. Towns struggled to support both residents and travelers. During hard years, caravans found fewer places willing to help. Food tied people to the road emotionally. Meals marked the day. They created moments of rest. Around small fires, people talked quietly. Stories were exchanged. Worries surfaced. Food became the setting for human connection, even when it was scarce. But food could also end journeys. Running out meant turning back, or waiting dangerously long. Delays increased exposure to weather and theft. Hunger weakened bodies, making illness more likely. There was no romance in this reality. Survival depended on restraint, planning, and acceptance. People ate what they had, not what they wanted. They learned to move while hungry, to sleep while hungry, to think clearly while hungry. The Silk Road was built on these compromises. Trade depended on people who could endure less, who could make careful decisions despite empty stomachs, who understood that the road rewarded discipline, not indulgence. Each meal was small, each decision was heavy, and hunger, though quiet, walked beside the road every day.
Caravanserais were built to offer shelter, but shelter did not mean comfort, and it never meant peace. Along the Silk Road, these roadside inns appeared at roughly a day's journey from one another. Their placement followed necessity, not generosity. Where travelers could reach before nightfall, a caravanserai might stand. Where they could not, there was often nothing at all. From the outside, a caravanserai looked solid. High walls, heavy gates, few windows. They were designed to protect, not to welcome. Arrival followed a familiar routine. Gates opened slowly. Animals were led inside first. Loads were set down. People entered last, counting heads, checking supplies, watching who else had arrived. The courtyard filled with movement and sound. Hooves struck stone. Bells rang softly. Voices overlapped in many languages. The space was shared. Everyone slept near everyone else. Animals, people, goods, all together. Privacy did not exist. Silence was temporary. Animals were placed along the edges or in lower areas. People slept above or near their loads. This arrangement was practical. Animals needed space and supervision. Goods needed protection. People adapted. The smell was unavoidable. Animals, sweat, dust, smoke, food cooking nearby, leather and wool damp with travel. No one complained. Complaining wasted energy. Caravanserais created temporary communities. People who had never met before shared space, water, and risk. Stories were exchanged quietly. News passed from mouth to mouth. Prices were discussed. Routes compared. Warnings offered or withheld. Trust formed slowly, if at all. Shelter brought safety, but also tension. Crowded conditions increased theft. A missing item could spark accusations. Proof was rare. Arguments were common. Caravan leaders watched carefully, knowing disputes could escalate. Disease traveled easily here. Shared water, shared air, shared surfaces. A cough might go unnoticed at arrival and become serious days later. People did not understand transmission. They only knew that sickness followed movement and crowds. Some caravanserais became places of quiet suffering. A traveler too weak to continue rested longer than planned. A sick animal occupied space meant for others. Decisions were delayed. Supplies were consumed. Tension grew without open conflict. Night changed the atmosphere. Gates were closed. Fires burned low. Guards took positions. The courtyard quieted but did not sleep. Animals shifted. People turned carefully. Every unfamiliar sound carried meaning. Safety was relative. Walls reduced the risk of attack, but not to zero. Theft still occurred. Violence was possible. The caravanserai protected against the open road.
not against human behavior. For locals, caravanserais were economic centers. Supplies were sold, repairs offered, food prepared, information gathered. But locals also bore the cost of travelers' presence. Resources were consumed quickly, prices rose. Tension existed on both sides. Some caravanserais were managed better than others. Rules varied. Some enforced order, others relied on informal authority. Travelers learned quickly which stops felt safer and which to leave early. Leaving followed another routine. At dawn, gates reopened, loads were lifted, animals knelt and rose again, supplies were checked. Anyone who had not recovered enough was left behind, or stayed voluntarily, hoping for another caravan. This moment was often quiet. There were no farewells, no explanations. The road did not wait for recovery. Caravanserais revealed the true nature of Silk Road travel. Not constant movement, but cycles of pressure and release. Not adventure, but negotiation with space and people. They were places of rest, but also places where weakness became visible. Shelter reduced danger. It did not remove it. Each stop was a reminder that survival depended on cooperation under strain, that strangers could become allies or risks within hours, that safety was temporary, borrowed from walls that would soon be left behind. As caravans moved on, the courtyard emptied, dust settled, footprints faded. Another group would arrive soon. The caravanserai remained, waiting quietly, offering the same imperfect protection to whoever reached it next.
Trade along the Silk Road rarely looked like movement. Most of the time, it looked like waiting. Goods traveled slowly, but decisions moved even more slowly. Trade was not a series of quick exchanges. It was a long process of negotiation, confirmation, delay, and restraint. For every day spent walking, many more were spent standing still. Markets did not rush. Buyers examined goods carefully. Sellers explained, defended, and repeated their claims. Weights were checked, then checked again. Scales were watched closely. Everyone understood that a small difference could mean profit or loss. Trust was fragile. Most traders dealt with people they did not know and might never see again. Reputation mattered, but information traveled slowly. A dishonest deal might only become known far away, long after the damage was done. This uncertainty shaped behavior. Negotiations were calm on the surface, tense underneath. Voices stayed low, gestures were controlled. Losing patience was a weakness others could use. Waiting filled the hours. Traders waited for prices to improve. They waited for middlemen to appear. They waited for permission, approval, or protection. Waiting consumed food, water, and energy. Each delay increased pressure, especially for those with limited resources. Middlemen were unavoidable. Most long-distance traders did not sell directly to final buyers. Goods passed through multiple hands. Each exchange reduced risk, but also reduced profit. Refusing intermediaries was dangerous. Accepting them meant losing control. Small traders suffered the most. They handled modest quantities, not luxury shipments. A single bad deal could erase months of effort. Debt followed failure closely. Many continued trading not because it was profitable, but because stopping offered no alternative. Trade involved careful timing. Selling too early meant low prices. Selling too late risked spoilage, theft, or route closure. Decisions were made with incomplete information, guided by experience, not certainty. Fraud existed quietly. False weights, altered measures, mixed quality goods. These were not rare exceptions. They were risks built into the system. Accusations were dangerous and often useless. Proof was difficult.
Confrontation could end access to future trade. This created silent tolerance. Traders learned to absorb small losses to avoid larger ones. Complaints were measured. Reputation was protected even when deals felt unfair. Trade spaces were crowded and tense. Languages mixed, gestures replaced words. Misunderstandings were common. A mistake in translation could change meaning entirely. Agreements were confirmed again and again to reduce error. Paperwork existed, but not everywhere. Some deals relied on documents, others depended on memory and witnesses. Written records helped, but literacy was uneven. Oral agreements still carried weight and risk. Trade did not stop at night. Counting continued by firelight. Goods were guarded. Conversations resumed quietly. Plans were adjusted. Sleep was shallow when deals remained unfinished. The darker side of waiting revealed itself slowly. Supplies dwindled, prices changed, local authorities demanded fees. Time worked against those with fewer resources. Wealthier traders could wait, poorer ones could not. Pressure shaped outcomes. Hunger encouraged bad deals. Fatigue reduced caution. Fear of loss pushed people into agreement before readiness. The road rewarded patience, but punished those who ran out of it. Trade created hierarchies. Some people controlled information, routes, or access. Others depended on them. Power was rarely obvious, but always present. Those without leverage learned to accept less. Despite this, trade continued, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Goods had value only if they moved. Movement required agreement. Agreement required waiting. The Silk Road functioned through these pauses: long hours of stillness, quiet conversations, careful calculations. Trade was not a dramatic exchange between distant worlds. It was a slow negotiation shaped by time, pressure, and endurance. Most deals were forgettable. They did not change history. They fed families, they paid debts, they allowed the next journey to begin. As traders finally closed agreements and prepared to move again, relief mixed with unease. Success today did not guarantee safety tomorrow. The road did not reward speed. It rewarded those who could wait without breaking. Towns along the Silk Road did not exist by accident. They grew where movement paused, where water could be reached, where animals needed rest. These places were not built for travelers alone. They were built for survival in a landscape that allowed little margin for error. Daily life in these towns was shaped by waves. Caravans arrived, markets filled, work increased. Then caravans left, streets quieted, waiting returned. This rhythm defined everything. Local people lived between these moments. They prepared for arrivals and endured absences. Their work depended on strangers they did not control. A good season meant stability. A bad one meant scarcity. Many trades existed only because the road passed nearby. Food sellers, animal handlers, repair workers, guides, guards, craftsmen. Children learned early which skills mattered: fixing a broken strap, measuring grain, carrying water, remembering a few useful phrases in unfamiliar languages. Strangers were familiar, but never normal. Towns learned to recognize types: long-distance traders, pilgrims, guards, messengers. Each brought different risks and opportunities. Hospitality was expected. Trust was limited. Every arrival changed the balance. More people meant more demand. Prices rose, supplies thinned. Tension followed quietly. Locals needed caravans, but too many at once strained resources. Disease followed these waves. Illness entered towns with travelers. Symptoms appeared days later when the source was already gone. People did not understand how sickness spread. They only knew that movement brought it. Closing the town meant economic harm. Staying open meant risk. Authority was often uneven. Some towns had officials or garrisons. Others relied on informal rules. Power could shift quickly. A change in control meant new taxes, new restrictions, new dangers. Local people adapted because they had no alternative. Children grew up surrounded by change. They heard many languages, but belonged fully to none. They learned to watch before speaking, to judge mood and intention quickly. The road taught caution as much as opportunity. Women played visible roles. They sold food, managed small trade, worked in inns, interacted daily with outsiders. This visibility supported households, but also brought vulnerability. Protection depended on family, reputation, circumstance. Night revealed another side of town life. When caravans settled, streets became quieter but not safer. Outsiders slept nearby. Animals crowded courtyards. Guards watched gates. Locals listened carefully to unfamiliar sounds. The presence of strangers increased uncertainty. Thefts were more common during busy periods. Conflicts arose from misunderstanding. Violence was rare but always possible. Towns balanced openness with vigilance. Towns also served as information centers. News arrived through travelers. Prices, conflicts, route conditions, political changes. Much of this information was incomplete or outdated. Decisions were made with fragments of truth. This uncertainty shaped planning. Farmers adjusted planting. Traders delayed departure. Families stored what they could. Everyone learned to expect change without warning. The dark side of dependence was always present. If routes shifted, towns declined. Wells were abandoned. Markets emptied. People left if they could. Those who remained adapted again, shrinking their lives to what the land still allowed. Not all towns survived. Some vanished quietly when water failed or movement changed. Others endured by repositioning themselves along new routes. Survival depended on flexibility, not strength. Despite these pressures, life continued. Children were born, work resumed, meals were shared. The road shaped towns, but it did not define every moment. Local routines filled the spaces between arrivals. People learned to live with uncertainty. They welcomed strangers while protecting themselves. They depended on movement while fearing its consequences. They built lives on ground that could shift at any time. As caravans departed, dust settled again. The town returned to waiting. Waiting for footsteps, waiting for sound, waiting for whatever the road would bring next.
Belief along the Silk Road was not abstract. It was practical. People did not turn to belief only to understand the world. They turned to it to survive within it, for protection, for reassurance, for a sense of order in a place where control was limited and danger was always near. Every departure carried ritual. Before setting out, people paused, not for long, just long enough to mark the moment. A small offering was placed. A word was spoken quietly. An amulet was touched or adjusted. These actions were not dramatic. They were habitual, repeated so often they felt necessary. Belief helped structure uncertainty. When routes were long and outcomes unclear, ritual offered something stable, a moment that stayed the same even when everything else changed. Along the road, many beliefs existed side by side: Buddhism, local spirits, older traditions, later monotheistic faiths. They did not replace one another overnight, they overlapped. People borrowed practices without abandoning old ones. Protection mattered more than doctrine. Shrines appeared where fear concentrated, at mountain passes, near dangerous crossings, beside wells and oases. These were not grand temples. Often they were simple: stones stacked by hand, cloth tied to branches, small offerings left behind. They marked places where travelers felt exposed. Fear shaped belief more than theology. Deserts were believed to hold spirits. Mountains were seen as alive and dangerous.
Sudden storms felt intentional. When people vanished, explanations followed belief rather than evidence. Amulets were everywhere, worn on the body, tied to animals, attached to loads. Their purpose was clear: reduce risk. Whether they worked mattered less than the comfort they provided. Belief offered psychological protection. It helped people continue despite exhaustion. It softened loss. It explained misfortune without demanding answers that could not be found. But belief could also mislead. People delayed departure for signs, turned back because of dreams, avoided routes based on rumor. Sometimes these choices saved lives. Sometimes they increased danger. Distinguishing wisdom from fear was never easy. Communal rituals created unity. Shared prayers reduced tension inside caravans. They offered a sense of shared fate. Even those who did not fully believe often participated. They understood the social value. In towns, belief shaped daily routine. Temples and shrines were part of ordinary life. People stopped briefly during the day. Offerings were small, frequent. Religion was woven into habit, not separated from work. Belief also enforced social rules. Oaths mattered. Breaking them damaged reputation. Trust traveled with people, reinforced through shared ritual more than written agreement. Yet belief did not protect everyone equally. Women, children, the poor, those without power relied on ritual because other forms of protection were limited. For them, belief filled gaps left by wealth and authority. In times of illness, belief intensified. When sickness appeared, people prayed. They isolated the sick based on fear, not understanding. Sometimes this helped, sometimes it worsened suffering. Medicine was limited. Faith stepped in where knowledge failed. Belief shaped how people understood loss. A failed journey became fate. A dead animal became warning. A storm became message. These interpretations allowed people to continue without being paralyzed by guilt or uncertainty. But belief did not remove fear. It lived alongside it. Night amplified this reality. Darkness reduced visibility. Sounds carried further. People touched amulets more tightly. Guards murmured prayers during watch. Silence felt heavier. Belief did not promise safety. It promised meaning. For most people, that was enough. Along the Silk Road, life unfolded with the understanding that not everything could be controlled. Belief allowed people to move anyway, to step forward despite uncertainty, to endure without answers. It was not romantic. It was necessary. As travelers prepared to move on, rituals repeated, words spoken again, gestures completed. Whether followed out of deep faith or quiet habit, these acts gave structure to a landscape that offered little forgiveness. Belief did not change the road, but it changed how people walked it. Disease along the Silk Road rarely arrived suddenly. It did not announce itself. It did not appear with warning or spectacle. It moved quietly, carried the same way as goods and stories, following routine, following proximity, following repetition. Movement made it possible. Caravans brought together people who would otherwise never meet. They shared wells. They shared food. They shared sleeping spaces. These connections sustained trade. They also carried illness farther than any single traveler could. People did not understand why sickness spread. They recognized patterns, not causes. Illness followed crowds. It appeared after arrivals. It lingered where movement paused. Explanations came from belief, not biology. Caravanserais were especially vulnerable. They concentrated exhaustion, animals, strangers, all inside enclosed walls. Water was shared. Air grew heavy. A single cough could echo through a courtyard for days, and when people left, they carried whatever had begun there onward. Symptoms were often delayed. A traveler might feel well when departing and fall ill days later, far from the source. By then, the connection was lost. Blame had nowhere to land. Isolation was imperfect. When sickness appeared, fear arrived quickly. The ill were separated when possible, but space was limited. Care depended on resources, on willingness. Compassion competed with self-preservation. Some were left behind, not always out of cruelty, but out of necessity. A person unable to walk slowed the group. Carrying them risked everyone. Decisions were made quietly, often without discussion. Towns faced the same dilemma. Closing gates reduced exposure, but it also cut off trade. Staying open preserved livelihoods, but invited disease. Most towns chose a fragile balance, adjusting without certainty. Illness reshaped daily routine. Movement slowed, work paused, conversations shortened. Fear changed behavior more than symptoms did. People avoided contact, shared meals ended. Silence increased. Children suffered disproportionately. Their bodies were weaker. Their care depended on adults already strained. Many did not survive outbreaks. These losses rarely entered records, but they shaped communities deeply. Disease affected trust. Strangers became risks. Familiar faces were watched more closely. Hospitality narrowed. The road's openness contracted under fear. There was no cure on the road. Rest was the primary response. Water, if available, warmth, if possible. Recovery depended on strength and chance. Those who survived did not know why. Animals were affected too. Illness spread among them. A weak animal slowed caravans, increased risk. Their sickness threatened movement and survival together. Epidemics were not constant, but they were remembered. Stories circulated, towns emptied, routes avoided, seasons marked with loss. These memories influenced decisions long after danger passed. Fear lasted longer than disease. Even after recovery, suspicion remained. People watched for signs, avoided certain places, changed habits quietly. And still, movement continued. Trade did not stop for illness. The road could not afford to close. People accepted risk as part of life. They adjusted rather than retreated. Disease became another cost, like hunger, like thirst, like exhaustion. It was absorbed into routine. Belief offered explanation when knowledge failed. Illness was seen as imbalance, as punishment, as fate. Rituals increased, prayers multiplied. These responses offered comfort, even when they did not cure. The road carried both connection and consequence. What happened in one region did not stay there. It traveled, slowly, steadily, with human movement. Daily life adapted. People learned to live with uncertainty, to accept that sickness could arrive without warning, to continue despite it. Survival did not mean safety. It meant endurance. As caravans moved on, some left sickness behind. Others carried it forward unknowingly. The road did not distinguish. Disease did not change the purpose of the Silk Road, but it revealed its cost. Connection came with exposure. Movement came with risk. Ordinary people bore this quietly, adjusting their lives without expectation of relief. The road remained open, and disease moved with it.
Violence along the Silk Road was rarely sudden. It was expected. Travelers did not move through empty space. They passed through regions controlled by people with power, interests, and weapons. Danger did not always arrive as an attack. Often it appeared as pressure, as demand, as a quiet threat that did not need to be spoken aloud. Robbery was a constant concern. Narrow passes, isolated stretches, edges of desert where help could not arrive in time. Caravans responded by traveling together, by hiring guards, by choosing routes with care. Even then, safety was never guaranteed. Most attacks were practical, not dramatic. Goods were taken, animals were seized, people were injured or killed if they resisted. Survivors moved on quickly, stopping to mourn increased risk. Protection came at a price. Guards were hired for dangerous sections. Fees were paid at borders and checkpoints. Some payments were official, others were not. Refusal often meant trouble.
Violence did not always come from outsiders. Local authorities could exploit travelers. New rulers imposed sudden taxes. Officials delayed caravans until payments were made. The road exposed travelers to many forms of control. Slavery was part of this system. People were bought, sold, transported along the same routes as goods. Prisoners of war, debtors, the vulnerable. They were forced into movement. Some traveled in chains. Others moved quietly, integrated into caravans as labor. Human cargo moved without ceremony. Enslaved people carried loads, tended animals, worked without pay. Their suffering rarely slowed the journey. If they became weak, they were replaced or left behind. Debt created another form of coercion. A failed trade could trap a person for years. Unable to repay, they worked under the control of others. Movement continued. Freedom did not. Women faced particular danger. Travel exposed them to harassment, to assault, to exploitation. Protection depended on companions, on reputation, on circumstance. Alone, they were vulnerable. Even within groups, safety was uncertain. Children were not spared. Some traveled with families. Others were sold or forced into labor. Their presence on the road reflected hardship, not choice. Violence shaped behavior. Travelers avoided routes not because they were longer, but because they were safer. Movement slowed in unstable regions. Caravans waited for escorts. Entire branches of the network weakened when violence increased. Fear became routine. Guards stayed alert. Conversations lowered. Camps were arranged defensively. People learned to read silence, to read movement, to sense threat before it spoke. Violence did not end at night. Darkness increased risk. Fires were kept small. Watches rotated. Sleep was light. A sudden sound could wake everyone. Despite this, the road functioned, not because violence was rare, but because it was managed. People adapted. They accepted risk as part of movement. Power along the Silk Road was uneven. Those with resources bought protection. Those without accepted exposure. Wealth reduced danger. It never eliminated it. Violence left marks beyond injury. It shaped memory. Routes became known as safe or dangerous. Towns gained reputations. Stories circulated as warnings. Some people disappeared completely. No record, no explanation. Their absence became part of the road's silent history. And still, trade continued, because stopping was not an option for many. Debts remained, families waited, goods lost value if they did not move. Violence was not a breakdown of the system. It was one of its conditions. Ordinary people understood this early. They did not expect fairness from the road. They expected unpredictability. Survival depended on caution, on alliances, on restraint. Strength alone was not enough. Awareness mattered more. The Silk Road endured not because it was safe. It endured because people learned how to move through danger without confronting it directly. Violence was absorbed into routine, like hunger, like disease, like fear. It did not define every moment, but it shaped all of them.
Night along the Silk Road was not a time for movement. It was a time for containment. When daylight faded, travel usually stopped. Darkness reduced visibility. It increased risk. It amplified every mistake. The road that felt manageable under the sun became uncertain after sunset. Camps formed carefully. Where to stop mattered. Ground needed to be firm. Access to water mattered. Distance from open paths mattered. The wrong place invited trouble. The right one only reduced it. Animals were settled first. They knelt heavily, breathing slow, loud, marked by the effort of the day. Loads were loosened. Water was rationed. Their position shaped the camp.
because losing an animal at night meant losing the journey. People stayed close to their goods, not out of comfort, out of necessity. Theft was easier under darkness, accusations were harder to prove. Everyone understood that vigilance mattered more than rest. Fires were kept small, fuel was limited, light attracted attention, flames provided warmth, minimal visibility, never comfort. Smoke drifted low, shadows moved across faces and walls. Sound changed at night. During the day, noise blended into movement. At night, every sound stood alone. An animal shifting, a footstep, wind moving through fabric. Silence became heavy, broken only by necessary movement. Guards took turns. Watch was divided quietly. No one stayed awake too long. Fatigue reduced awareness. A tired guard was as dangerous as no guard at all. Sleep was shallow. People slept dressed, ready to move if needed. Weapons, tools, walking sticks remained close. Dreams were interrupted easily. Rest was partial, never complete. Cold intensified the night. Even deserts cooled sharply after sunset. Mountains became bitter. Bodies that endured heat all day struggled to stay warm. Blankets were thin. Fire was limited. Animals provided some warmth. They also demanded space. Fear increased without direction. During the day, danger could be seen or avoided. At night, imagination filled the gaps. Stories returned quietly. Past attacks, disappearances. People listened for sounds that meant nothing, and some that meant everything. Travelers avoided unnecessary movement. Stepping away from camp increased risk. Distance dissolved into darkness. Returning could become difficult. People learned to remain still. In towns, night followed different rules. Gates closed, streets emptied. Lanterns provided weak pools of light. Outsiders were watched carefully. Locals stayed indoors. Movement after dark invited suspicion. Crime increased at night. Thefts were more likely, conflicts harder to resolve, authorities slower to respond. Darkness protected both victims and offenders. Disease felt stronger at night. Fever worsened, coughs echoed. Weakness became more noticeable. Those already struggling felt the night more intensely. Night revealed hierarchy. Those with resources slept warmer, safer. Those without endured cold and exposure. Enslaved people, servants, guards, they remained awake longer. Rest was unevenly distributed. Despite this, night was necessary. Bodies needed pause. Animals required recovery. Movement without rest was impossible. The road accepted night as a limit that could not be ignored. Stars were visible. In open areas, the sky stretched wide. Some used stars for orientation, others avoided looking upward, focused instead on immediate risk. Beauty existed, it was secondary. Night did not offer reflection, it demanded awareness. Every dawn felt earned. Surviving the night meant another day was possible, another calculation, another set of decisions. Relief was quiet, temporary. People did not romanticize night travel, they respected its danger. Night along the Silk Road was not a backdrop, it was an obstacle, a period where progress paused, where vulnerability increased, where control was reduced, where patience mattered more than courage. When morning finally arrived, camps stirred slowly, bodies rose stiffly, animals stood with effort, supplies were checked again. Whatever fear the night had carried was folded back into routine. The road allowed movement once more, but it never forgot the night.
Distance along the Silk Road was not only physical, it was mental. People did not measure separation only in kilometers or days. They measured it in silence, in unanswered questions, in the slow erosion of certainty. The farther one moved from home, the more fragile familiar life became. Long journeys reshaped the mind. Weeks passed without news. Months passed without contact. Letters, if they existed at all, traveled slowly, unreliably. Many never arrived.
For those who remained behind, absence became the default state. Uncertainty became routine. Families did not know if travelers were delayed, injured, lost, or dead. There were no updates, no confirmations. Waiting filled daily life with quiet tension. Travelers carried the same burden. They wondered what had changed at home, whether debts had grown, whether children had aged beyond recognition, whether illness or conflict had altered everything they planned to return to. The road separated people in ways that could not be repaired. When someone died far from home, mourning was incomplete. There were no shared rituals, no familiar voices. Grief was carried privately, often without pause. The journey did not stop for loss. Isolation intensified decision-making. Without familiar support, choices felt heavier. Mistakes could not be discussed, could not be corrected later. Regret traveled alongside hope. Loneliness took many forms. Some felt it in silence, others in crowded caravanserai, surrounded by people yet understood by none. Language barriers deepened this distance. Even when communication was possible, emotional understanding remained limited. People adapted psychologically. They learned to narrow their focus, to think only of the next stop, the next task, the next day. Long-term thinking increased anxiety. Short-term planning preserved stability. Hope became restrained. Grand expectations were dangerous. People learned to expect survival rather than success. Relief replaced excitement. Arrival mattered more than profit. Debt amplified psychological pressure. Many traveled because they had no alternative. Failed trade meant ruin. Turning back meant shame or obligation. Continuing forward felt compulsory rather than chosen. This pressure reduced freedom. Movement appeared voluntary. Often it was not. People walked because stopping carried consequences of its own. Children experienced this weight differently. Those raised near the road learned early that absence was normal. Parents left, returned months or years later, changed, or not at all. Stability was fragile. For women, separation carried added vulnerability. Waiting without information increased risk. Decisions had to be made without guidance. Protection was uncertain. Social position could weaken in absence. The road rewarded emotional control. Those who reacted strongly struggled. Panic led to poor choices. Despair weakened endurance. Calm preservation of energy and attention improved survival. Fear was constant, but managed. People learned not to dwell on it, to accept risk without surrendering to it. Suppressing fear became a skill. Distance distorted time. Days blurred together. Events lost clarity. Memory softened. Some returned unable to describe their journey clearly. Others remembered only fragments. Psychological fatigue accumulated slowly. There was no single breaking point. Instead, weariness built through repetition, through loss, through uncertainty. Many continued simply because stopping required confronting everything they had postponed. The road normalized this strain. No one expected travelers to return unchanged. Hardness was accepted. Quietness was respected. Emotional distance became a form of protection. Yet connection never disappeared completely. Small gestures mattered more. Shared meals, familiar routines, repeated greetings. These offered grounding amid instability. At night, thoughts became heavier. Without movement to distract, memory returned. Worry expanded. Sleep came lightly. Morning was welcomed not for opportunity, but for relief from thinking. The Silk Road tested endurance beyond the body. It demanded mental restraint, emotional compression, acceptance of uncertainty. Those who survived did not conquer fear. They learned to carry it. Distance did not break everyone, but it reshaped everyone. By the time travelers neared the end of a long journey, they were often quieter, more cautious, less certain. What they had gained was not confidence. It was tolerance for instability. The road left marks that could not be seen, and those marks lasted long after the journey ended.
The Silk Road did not endure because it was easy. It endured because people adjusted to it. For more than 1,000 years, movement continued across deserts, mountains, and fragile borders, not through strength or ambition, but through habit. Ordinary people learned how to live with uncertainty, and they repeated the same careful actions day after day. The road survived because it became routine. Not a single journey, but millions of small ones. Not heroic effort, but steady endurance. People rose before dawn. They checked animals. They counted water. They moved when it was possible, and they stopped when it was not. This rhythm, repeated across generations, created continuity where none should have existed. The Silk Road was held together by ordinary lives, by families who lived near wells and passes, by traders who carried modest goods, by guards who watched at night, by animals that bore the weight without understanding why. Most people involved never became wealthy. Many never traveled far, yet their presence sustained the system. The dark realities never disappeared. Hunger remained, disease returned, violence followed opportunity, distance strained families, but none of these stopped the road completely. They were absorbed into daily expectation. People learned not to be surprised by hardship. Surprise wasted energy. The endurance of the road came from acceptance. Acceptance that roots would change, acceptance that loss was possible, acceptance that survival mattered more than success. This mindset allowed people to continue even when conditions worsened. Cultural exchange did not happen in moments of wonder. It happened in repetition. Shared meals, shared shelters, shared routines. Over time, habits crossed borders more reliably than ideas. Language blended slowly. Belief adapted quietly. Practical knowledge traveled farther than philosophy. The road did not belong to empires alone. Empires rose and fell, borders shifted, rulers changed. Yet the paths remained in use because ordinary needs remained unchanged. People still required food, goods, connection, work. The Silk Road outlasted politics because it was human. Its strength came from flexibility, not control. When one route closed, another opened. When one town declined, another adapted. The system bent rather than broke. In the end, the road did not disappear suddenly. It faded. Maritime trade increased, political stability shifted, new technologies changed movement. Gradually, fewer people walked the old paths. Wells dried, caravanserais emptied, towns shrank or vanished. But the habits remained. Even after the road itself quieted, the patterns it created lived on, in communities shaped by centuries of movement. Skills passed down, stories softened, memory blurred. What remains today is not the noise of caravans. It is the understanding that connection has always carried cost. The Silk Road reminds us that long-distance exchange was never effortless. It depended on patience, restraint, people willing to endure uncertainty without guarantee of reward. This is its true legacy, not luxury, not speed, not adventure, but resilience. As night settles over the imagined road now, there is no movement. Animals rest, camps grow quiet, fires fade to embers. The same silence that once covered deserts and passes settles gently here. People who lived along the Silk Road would recognize this moment.
the pause between days, the temporary safety of rest, the relief of having reached night intact. Tomorrow would bring the same calculations again, but for now there is nothing to decide. The road is still, the waiting is over for the day, and you can rest too. Let the noise fade, let the distance soften, let the long path fall quiet. You've reached the end of this journey. May your thoughts slow, may your breathing steady, and may your sleep come gently. Good night.